Hello, you're listening to Mike Madden on the Art Show podcast. Here you'll find interviews with authors, musicians, artists and anyone else in and around the arts. Some of the interviews are taken direct from the Art Show on Expat Radio, with one or two specials in between. On this show, I chat with author, humanitarian and activist Talia Carner. She talks about her 5 novels, including her latest one, due out in September, The Third Daughter. It was originally broadcast on Expat Radio on Monday the 15th of April 2019. Due to licensing restrictions, we were unable to play the songs from the original broadcast.
Hello, this is Mike Madden on the Art Show on Expat Radio, and tonight I'm very pleased to announce that all the way from New York is a very special guest, Talia Carner. Good evening, Talia.
Good evening, Mike. I'm so happy to be on your Expat Show.
Yes, this is an unusual one from us, although we did have an English person from New York on a couple of weeks ago. So you're a very successful author and a very successful person in your own right. But I want to concentrate on your novels, first of all. 5 successfully published novels. How did you actually begin your writing career?
I was always a good writer, but I used my writing skills for business. I wrote great industry overviews and absolutely very compelling marketing plans and, of course, sales letters that got me clients and so on. I also was a good storyteller in terms of telling. I made up hundreds of stories for my children when they were growing up, bedtime stories, and it came naturally to me. What I learned much later, after I started writing, was that the novel form is the most comfortable one for me. That means I need 100,000 words to express an idea. I cannot do that in a short poem, for example. And I think in a multi-layered type of horizontal thinking, keeping geography, religion, economics, politics, social conformity, psychology, all of those forces that shape our lives, I keep them all together at the same time in my head horizontally as I watch my protagonists go through whatever are the social issues or the problems that she encounters as she learns one tragedy befalls on her or another kind of crisis comes. So for me, that form, the novel, seems to be the most comfortable one. I didn't know that on November 3rd, 1993, at 2:48 p.m., when I sat down to start typing my first novel. I just didn't know why that was the form that was convenient for me, but I learned that later.
Well, of course, you have written lots of essays, short stories. You've worked with Forbes 500 companies in marketing, and you've settled on novels, which is interesting. Do you actually plan the novel out, or do you just let it flow and see where it takes you?
I must just correct you to say that creative writing, all my short pieces that I published, and I'm talking about maybe 30 short stories and I don't know, 3 dozen essays and some articles. All of this happened after I started writing my first novel. I did not write creatively before, other than what I mentioned for business. So in terms of the novel layout, I do not schedule it. I don't know what's going to happen. Every time the reader is surprised by a turn of events, I'm just as surprised at the time that I write it. There's always, I know that within a chapter or 2 or 5, there should be a big hand should come out from the sky and pull the story out of its orbit and send it elsewhere with a big twist. But what is that twist? What is this that's going to happen? I don't know ahead of time. I go through the journey more, I would say it's closer to being in a dream where you are in that, I'm in that trance. And I see the sights and I smell the smells and I hear the voices and I feel the feelings fully. But then I find that it's a dream. Obviously, it has more of a logic than a dream would be. But that is how my scenes develop, and that's how things happen throughout the book. I must say that over the years, when I became a more experienced writer, I learned not to let the story take me elsewhere to all kind of places that I did not need to go, with subplots that turned into more subplots, and they just did not belong to the main storyline.
Right, so you try and keep it as focused as possible on the main storyline.
Yes, I remain with the protagonist. I keep her now more in line in terms of what she wants to do in life and how whatever it is that she wants, how it works or doesn't work within the circumstances, within the, as I'm saying, the forces that shape our lives. But the place itself, see, you mentioned 5 novels. The 5th one is coming out in September, so it's not out yet. But the place itself is a character in the book. The new one is in Buenos Aires. The one before Hotel Moscow is obviously in Moscow. The one before Jerusalem Maiden takes place in Jerusalem in 1911 and continues in Paris of 1924 during the avant-garde era. The one before Anadol takes place in Beijing. And the one before takes place in New York and a bit of in the kibbutz in Israel. So the place itself is a character, it's a particular event or social issue that only can happen at this time and at that place, even though the emotions may be universal. So Hotel Moscow, for example, takes place in 1993 during the uprising of the Russian parliament against Boris Yeltsin. And it takes place right then and there. It cannot take place elsewhere, that particular story, because it deals with the transition from communism and what it means for the people on the street. What does the corruption on the top means to the people at the bottom? Those are specific things that have to do with the place, and the place then it becomes a character in each one of my novels.
So the place and time are very important because of the subject matter, and your subject matter could be described as edgy, but it's very realistic to yourself because of your experience in, for instance, the International Women's Conference in Beijing, which led to one of your stories, and research into religious oppressive societies that inspired Jerusalem Maiden. So do you deliberately set out to make them that edgy? Is that where your premise is when you sit down to write?
I must say humbly that in none of my books I was seeking a story, but rather they find me, they haunt me. Each one of those stories just doesn't let me go. And some of them ferment for many years. The one that's coming up in September, it's called The Third Daughter, deals with trafficking. And there were all kinds of issues around it that I had looked into over the years and dropped it because I didn't want to deal with that. And then they came to haunt me. it forced me to write that story. Jerusalem Maiden was inspired by my grandmother's unlived talent, untapped artistic talent. So I must say I grew up with it. I always wondered about it. It was part of not just who my grandmother was or wasn't, but who I was as a woman who watched the talent of my grandmother, then subsequently my own mother, who eventually became an artist, an extremely successful artist, but she didn't start painting until she was 42. So it was something that I've watched that became part of who I was until I one day sat down to write a what if that's called Jerusalem Maiden. So I don't look them up.
So when you write something like, for instance, Hotel Moscow, that is about the time of Boris Yeltsin, do you ever get the sort of sense that you might have to adjust a character here or there because it's a bit too realistic and it might be construed that you're actually placing a real person in the book?
None of the people, the characters in the book are real people. And to tell you the truth, I think that many real people are pretty boring because in a novel, you need to really concentrate all the traits that are relevant to the story. Even as you write details of the person and you show how the person react to different events that happen, or I mentioned the forces that control our lives, none of them are real. In Hotel Moscow, I mentioned Yeltsin. Yes, I mentioned him. He's not a character there. But of all the characters in Hotel Moscow, I would say there's a side character by the name of Jenny, who is a crazy woman. Is an American woman. The American her colleagues all think she's off the top, and she's nuts. And she causes a lot of problems for them, which is part of the plot. But the Russian women view her differently, and they admire her and they adore her. So, yes, I met somebody like that. But then I moved just with the idea and made it that character her own. But otherwise, I cannot say, even I am not in any of my novels. None of those represents me, my character, who I am, what my life has been. My life has been quite interesting, I must say, but it never comes into the book. I bring the emotions, I bring the sympathy, I bring the understanding, and probably the fire in the belly to make the 5-6 year commitment that each book takes me.
As I think as well, one of the lines that I've read about your writing is that it gives a voice to those who do not have one. So it's fighting the case for the oppressed. And I know you're an activist, a feminist, a humanitarian, publisher of Savvy Women magazine. You've done lots of other things that have been very influential, world changing almost, when I look through your history. So what would you say was the most important thing that you've ever done outside the world of writing?
Outside the world of writing, becoming who I am, I would say is the most important, because it was a lot of work too. To come into myself, to mature into myself, I would say that. And yes, I also have quite a nice family, but I leave that family outside of my public life, out of Facebook most of the time. I have a husband listed, and I even opened a page for him just so guys stop hitting on me, because when I just wrote that I was married, it didn't help, so I put a page for him with a picture with a person. But I would say that was a big thing. I would say a couple of other very big things in my life was in March of 2007, I introduced at the UN the subject of infanticide in China based upon research that I've done with numbers, statistical research that's showing 1,310,000 girls disappeared every year. That was the latest numbers I had then, was for a year and a half before. And I introduced that at the UN. That presentation is still on my website about the infanticide in China. And it was the first time in the history of the UN that the subject came up. And needless to say that the Chinese struck it out. They have a lot more clout than I do. I introduced it. I was under some weird circumstances under the auspices of the Italian mission to the UN that allowed me that opportunity. And I would say it was a big event in my life. I felt that I did something really important. But I can't say that it's outside my writing life because it came directly as a result of my writing the novel China Doll, which deals with infanticide in China. So back to what I've done that's really meaningful. I served in the IDF, that's the Israeli Defense Force. As an Israeli, I served in the army. I am very proud of my service to my country. So that as well.
So if I just go back to the presentation to the UN, I would guess that not very many, if any at all, of our listeners would ever even know how to approach the UN with such a groundbreaking paper or proposal. So where does that come from? Is that your upbringing? Have you always been told or taught to stand up for yourself or what you believe in and that kind of thing?
No, I think a lot of things happen by being in the right time in the right place, but getting out there and making myself available. There is an organization, it kind of changed its name a little bit. Business and Professional Women International was the name of the organization at the time in 2007. It changed a little bit its names, but I had presented at various forms there, chapter and regional, and the person who was national president became the international president, and they have an observant status at the UN as an NGO. They were under the BPWI came a woman who was a Nobel Prize winner. At that time, I think she was 99 years old. And she was an amazing woman who, in around 1950, invented the protein or discovered the protein and got a Nobel Prize. And she was now, as a 98 or so, 99-year-old woman, she was working on different women's issues, getting computers to girls in Africa, things like that. So she was the one who was invited and under the auspices, because she was Italian, Jewish Italian, and she was invited to speak there. And BPWI was the sponsoring NGO that they brought me in along with her. So it was a very interesting situation. So you ask me, it's not like I filled up an application and had to go through all kinds of loops for that. I just got the idea. I got the invitation, and I was working already on this statistical analysis of infanticide in China, because the Chinese government was not very happy with when the criticism came along its way. They take it, until now, they take it as losing face when they get criticized. Also, they had what they thought was a legitimate claim. They said, hello, world, you told us to control population. So why are you so incensed when we are killing 1.5 million girls a year? That you told us to do that. So, of course, that's not what the West meant when they said control your population. And I was working on a statistical analysis. My background in business included a great ability to analyze statistics and see things in lines of numbers that other people don't see quite immediately. And I hired Mandarin and Chinese speaker researchers through the internet. I didn't even know these people, who they were, but I didn't know them personally, but they had to live outside of China in order to make all kind of research into anything that's written in Chinese and Mandarin and come back to me with anything that had figures and numbers. And they did. It was like 3 or 4 people. Each one came with different material, different resources. So I put it all together. One of them turned out to be also a statistician himself. So he helped me and we put together this whole presentation. So I was already working on it when I got the invitation, and this was the best opportunity to introduce and show the world not only how China kills the baby girls, but there is also an issue of the 3rd and 4th child ranking in a family where boys also get killed, but the numbers kind of even out. I don't want to go a lot further into it, but that's an example of how the big day at the UN happened.
Well, it's about time we took a break, so let's go to Sheryl Crow and All I Want to Do.
Expat Digital Radio, online 24/7.
This is Mike Madden on The Art Show on Expat Radio, and tonight my special guest is Talia Carner. Now, before the break, Talia was talking to us about her presentation to the UN on infanticide in China.
It's a fascinating story, and of course, it was the inspiration behind the book China Doll, which was your second novel. Now, your first novel, Puppet Child, that also has a bit of a controversial backstory to it.
It's about judges that, when given a chance, that when children who are molested come in front of them, and usually they're supposedly protected by the mothers. The mothers are disbelieved, disenfranchised, and discredited, and the judges put children in the hands of their molesters. And that has been happening all the time, all over. Thousands of children every year in the United States. It's true also in Europe and other places. And they are very ways in which mothers are being not very credible. For example, when a child is being raped 3 times a week, mother comes to court, she's pretty hysterical. And when the judge says you're not cooperating with your ex, she's really not up to cooperating. So the judge says, well, you don't show any goodwill, and you are hysterical and you're unbalanced. And no wonder your kid doesn't do well in school and stutters and all of that. So there's tremendous amount of bias against mothers right off the bat. It's a very long and complicated issue because organizations that supposedly fight child sexual abuse basically tend to fight abuse, educate before it happens, supposedly. But they do not get involved once it happens, because then it becomes a very convoluted, lengthy legal issue, and they don't want to get involved. So what they try to do is, we are against sexual abuse. And you know what? The people, the pedophiles who do that stuff, I don't exactly listen to those messages. And that is a big problem. It has not been resolved. And the mothers who've been through all of this, I met them already as of about a year, 1995. I started 1996. I started meeting them. And since then, I've seen that mothers, by the time the children grow up and speak to them for themselves, the kids are destroyed. They are basket cases, and the mothers are have lost it. They can't fight anymore. So we don't have good fighters in that whole field.
So this came out in 2002, and it was very well received and gained you more than one award. But how did you actually go about getting it into the hands of HarperCollins, who I think they were the publishers? Did you have to go through an agency, or did you go direct to HarperCollins? Because it is quite an edgy subject for a book, certainly for a new novelist.
Yeah, so first of all, just to say that my first book, Puppet Child, was published by a very small publisher that went out of business within a year after.
Right, okay.
The second that was Puppet Child. China Doll then was published also by a small publisher out of Kansas City that did other books, mostly nonfiction about social issues. And they wanted to get into fiction, and mine fit very well in there. So with both books, I developed the reviews and how it was well accepted. And each of those books did so well. I'm not just referring to sales, but in the marketplace in terms of society, that when I was ready with Jerusalem Maiden, which was my third book, I enrolled it. In the meanwhile, I've had one agent and another. The stories of agents, and in the United States, you must have an agent in order to get to a publishing house, any of the big houses. You cannot, they don't talk to an author directly the way sometimes they do in European publishing houses. Even the medium to small sizes but established publishers would use the agents as the gatekeepers, because the agent specializes in specific areas, and it could be a computer book, it could be a gardening book, it could be exotic cooking, whichever it is, but the agent already knows what's out there in the marketplace and which books he or she wants to represent. And they look at the quality, and sometimes they help the author just make slight changes. They don't go into any major revisions, but just to make it a little bit, maybe the pitch, to make that a little bit more appetizing, and then they know which publishers to go to. So the acquisition editors at the publishing houses will only listen to established agents because of that. It saves them enormous amount of time and effort. There is no longer, it used to be in publishing houses had slush piles, those manuscripts that came and were piling up, and sometimes when nobody had anything else to do, they would pick up some manuscript and look at it. That doesn't happen. And when Jerusalem Maiden was ready, I changed agents, but in order to do that, I had to help the agent sell my book to a publisher. And this particular agent I eventually landed was somebody I really wanted her to represent me. But as she read Jerusalem Maiden, and she wrote a letter, a rejection letter, that when I printed it out, it was a page and a half long of praises of how I did this well, I did that well, and this is fantastic, and nobody else treated the subject matter the way I did, and it was the best book review I could have received, except that at the end she said, but publishers today look for the next Da Vinci Code.
Yes.
That was popular at the time. This is back in around 2008 or so. So I enrolled the book. At that time, Amazon had a contest called the Breakthrough Amazon Novel Contest. And 10,000 was the second year of that contest. And 10,000 applicants were sent in with manuscripts, and they wanted specific, like you give them a sample, you give them all kind of, and then the whole book. And my book went through all of the stages and reached the semifinal. And that was the top 500, I believe. But when it was in the top 500, it was a quarterfinal. I wrote to that agent again. It was already a year after her rejection letter. I wrote to her again. I wasn't sure the book was going to go further than a quarterfinal, so I wanted to cash on it. And I said, here's your rejection letter. And this is what's happening with the book right now. It's already got in the top 500 out of 10,000 submissions. And she said, and I said, and I made some changes. So she wrote back, she said, send it to me now. I did. She read it on a flight back from the London Book Fair. And after she landed, she called me and she said, I'm taking it. And about a week later, the book made it to the semifinal, which could have been the top 100. I don't remember the numbers. But with that, she could go to HarperCollins and say, look at what this book is doing. How well. And of course, HarperCollins, also she was very well respected, and they had some very successful books from her. So that helps. So it all comes together. Of course, the book, Jerusalem Maiden, became a bestseller. And I must say that it's really doing very well. Hotel Moscow was a book afterwards that came in 2015 and has been doing well, but not as well as Jerusalem Maiden yet. And I have the same editor all this time, and she believes now that the third daughter that's coming out in September is another Jerusalem Maiden in that respect.
So did you get a multiple book deal with HarperCollins, or do they take them one at a time?
I will not take a multiple deal for the reason that, A, I don't know what my next book may or may not be. I know now what's my next book, but the other thing is I don't want to be beholden to anybody in terms of time. If I need, like the next book I'm now researching, and it happens to be set in France, not in Paris, but in France. And that one I've been researching for a year now, and I'm giving it 5 years. I'm not sure where the book is going. There's so much information that's coming to me that I don't need to research as much as the information comes to me. Always something else. I'm going back to France, and I'm interviewing another key person who heard that I was doing it he heard about it from another person, and he contacted me, and he has more information than anyone else probably. So it's coming to me. I don't know where the book is going to go, and I don't want to be beholden. So my editor at HarperCollins know that I'm chasing a story in France, or as I tell her, the story in France chases me and brings me back again and again to France. It's going to be my 5th trip to France on this story alone. But I don't know where the story is going, so I don't want to have a contract.
Right. So you might be another 5 trips to France, or there might not be any.
Yeah, well, what happens is in September 3rd, when the third daughter comes out, I'm beginning a book tour that's very intense. And I must say that while most authors are on book tours for a few weeks or a few months, Hotel Moscow, I was on a book tour for almost 4 years.
Wow.
Continually invited to give keynote speeches on those issues, and people, lunches, dinners, ticketed events where people pay ahead of time, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months ahead of time. They know there's an event that I come to speak, and they want to hear what I have to say. So it's great for me. It's not like in a bookstore where I sit there and I don't know if 2 people are going to come. I prefer those ticketed events, and when I get invited to them, I'm very happy to comply. So those events have been happening, as I'm saying, until last month was my very last one. I said no more. I'm really busy with a new book. But that was almost 4 years for Hotel Moscow.
It's interesting that a lot of authors that we speak to, it can be a hard grind getting through the last stages of the book. Certainly, there's the later stage edits, that kind of thing, and then there's the relief of the launch, and there's a few nice party events and signings. But 4 years of a book tour just seem an ordeal. But you obviously enjoy it. Have you got something similar lined up for the third daughter? Or is that just being put in place at the moment?
It will come. I will have a lot. I know that I will have a lot because, one already booked me for that. That it's a major 500 people event in March of 2020. And they already know that they're going to have 500 people. And they already asked me and I said yes. But otherwise, I don't accept invitations yet. There is a process that we need to go through. There is an organization in New York called the Jewish Book Council. And since I'm Jewish and my next book happens to deal very much with the Jewish issue, but it's not only, they have a conference in May where authors of new books, there could be liturgy, can be cookbooks, can be anything that has Jewish themes, can be fiction, of course, can be history, biographies, memoirs. They get to introduce their book, a 2-minute pitch, like speed dating. We get to introduce it to representatives of the Jewish community centers from all over the country and synagogues that come in. There are a lot of literary days in the Jewish community. I did not find them, for example, any equivalent in the YMCAs or in churches. For example, Jerusalem Maiden was reviewed in the Christian Science Monitor, 2/3 of a page. That's a tabloid size. The Christian Science Monitor is a very large size physically newspaper, and they gave 2/3 of a page to Jerusalem Maiden. We could not find any organizations that had literary days in the deep south in the United States. Nothing. No literary days. Nothing that has to do with the churches, with the religion, because Jerusalem Maiden deals with religion and was extremely well received by the Christian community. But there's nothing equivalent there that happens in the Jewish community all the time. So these are the opportunities that I will have after this conference when requests are going to be put in to my publisher about those JCCs and other events. And I mentioned to you the ticketed events by organizations that set up literary days and would invite me. So I need to wait until all of that in place. I get a schedule. I say yes or no to the various proposals. And only after that, I accept or not accept. I look into the individual events organizers who know me by now and may have me with every book, because my books take 4 or 5 years in between. So their audiences don't have to hear me every year. It can be 4 or 5 years in between each time that they meet me.
Yes.
So that's when I will know more about my full schedule.
Right. And who manages your schedule for you? Do you manage it all yourself?
No, I have an assistant who does only that. That's her job. She's my events coordinator, because it's an enormous amount. I must say that other authors don't have my situation when it comes to presenting. I got to like public speaking as much as I enjoy writing. And I'm a member of Toastmasters International. Are you familiar with that organization?
I am indeed familiar with it, yes.
Yes, so when I speak, you probably notice that I sound a little bit that I'm trained to speak publicly.
Very eloquent.
So I enjoy public speaking very much. And because of that, it kind of developed as a side thing to my writing, but because I enjoy meeting my audience, sharing with readers. You see, writing is a very long and lonely journey, and it's a journey I absolutely cherish. I love this 10, 16 hours straight where nothing else exists but me and my inner world and a computer and what happens there. That's totally alive to me, for me, as I mentioned to you, in a dream. But it's nice when that chapter is over, and now I get to speak about it to readers who appreciate the writing, who appreciate what I have to say, who share it with me. So that's a very fun part of all of it. And at the same time, I'm already at work on the next book. So if I ever get any downtime, which never happens too much, I try to have a life. I dance, I exercise, I go to the theater. I mentioned I have a family. They get to see me a bit. So I have a very nice, full life.
I was just about to ask you what you do for downtime, because it seems to me like you've lived a very successful life in business, and now you're a very successful author. But you must need that downtime. Is your writing, when you sit down to write, is it a solid block of time, or do you get distracted, or do you just shut yourself away?
I have to have blocks of time that are totally devoted to writing, because I mentioned to you the comparison to a dream. I can't get all of a sudden answer the phone call and say, okay, I'm going to wake up for the phone call. I'm going to answer a question and I'm going to go back to my dream. No, it's not going to happen. So I need that complete isolation and being only with myself and concentrating. But not so the research and not so the editing, which take a lot more time than writing fresh material. So it is the writing of fresh material when nothing before has been written about the subject for me. But once I have a draft, I can work on it so many times. If I can tell you the Third Daughters, if I worked on it maybe 40 times throughout, from beginning to end, I'm not exaggerating.
Right, so you divide it up so the actual writing of it is where you're concentrating and you're in the dream world.
So we're now going to take a trip back in time to the 1980s and Culture Club and Karma Chameleon.
You're listening to Expat Radio. You're listening to Expat Radio, beaming out across France and around the world.
This is Mike Madden on the Arts Show on Expat Radio. And before the break, my special guest Talia Carner was telling us about the countless times that she goes back to edit. So let's hear some more from Talia.
At a certain level of editing, if I need to restructure the book, if I need to figure out that a book needs a pacing, which means you need to get the adrenaline of the reader going. But the reader also needs some moments in which she can breathe and let out air, and so it's like you bring it down again for a little bit of reprieve, but then you ratcheted up the tension yet again to get to a new height. And when I need to make sure that those ups and downs are more or less have a certain pacing. You can't have, I shouldn't have a very long time of downtime because it's boring. After a while, you see, the novelist has a very interesting challenge, and I explained it not long ago to somebody who is a comedian. A comedian gets on stage and he has 30 seconds to grab the attention of his audience, to get the laughter, and then he has to keep on going and going and going. He doesn't let go. He needs to let down just a little bit before he brings it the next laughter, and he builds it up more and more. So, and then he has to keep it up for about an hour and a half. A novelist, in a way, has the same structure with big caveat, and that is, my reader picks up the book and she's totally engrossed in it at night before she falls asleep. And the book is now on the floor next to her bed. She gets up in the morning, she gets dressed, she goes to work, she meets friends, she has a fight with her boyfriend, her mother gets on her nerves, the boss is unbelievably rude, and the clients are impossible, and she has a very big day, and finally she comes back home, and I need to make sure she picks up my book off the floor and continues to read it. So wherever she leaves the book, it's a place where I want to make sure that she wants to get back to it. And that is a craft, actually, that I learned from a book from Stephen King.
I was just going to say that's exactly what Stephen King aims for.
Yeah, he does it with every sentence. He does it with every paragraph. My books are not suspense mysteries like his. Mine is a psychological suspense. I grab the reader psychologically, but it's not the same crime or violence that's involved in the kind of suspense that he writes. But nevertheless, the techniques are similar.
Yes, I'm reading his revised version of The Stand at the moment, and it's such an art form to write like that.
He has a book that called On Writing.
Yes,
that book is a primer for anybody who wants to write anything, because it's true for biographies. It's true for memoirs. You have to have that tension. You cannot not have tension, because then it gets boring.
I think it's a good analogy with the comedian as well, because you can't be 100% all of the time. You have to give the listener or the audience time to breathe in between the suspense.
Yes.
So we're running out of time now. In the minute or so we've got left, just let our listeners know where they can find out a little bit more about yourself and certainly more about your books.
Okay, so again, my name is Talia Carner. It's spelled TaliaCarn, as in Nancy, ER. And my website is www.taliacarner.com. And readers, you can all read the first chapter of any of my books. And I guarantee you that at least one or two makes you wonder all night whatever happened, and either you wake up and you order it that night, or you wake up the next morning and you get into those books. So that's the big thing. Now, how am I influenced by my own books? I must say that also something about me. My new book that's coming out in September, called The Third Daughter, is set in Buenos Aires in 1895, 125 years ago almost. And it was the beginning of tango also. So as I got involved in tango, and I've always considered I danced ballet, I danced all kind of dances. I no longer dance ballet. I aged out of it, but in the past year or so, I've been picking up tango, because I've been influenced by my own book, and I really would like to be good at it. Right. So kind of thing I do in my downtime.
So it's been great having you on the show, and it's obviously a few months until your book comes out. So perhaps we can set another date for maybe early September, and you can tell us all about the events that are coming up around the launch and in the 4 years afterwards.
Yes, I will be delighted to do that. I really appreciate your having me on your show. It's a pleasure speaking to you, and to expats in general. I'm an expat for Israel, living in New York, but really my heart is in Paris.
Right.
So I'm going back there in a few weeks. It's just fun. But I can't say that New York is not fun. It has a lot to offer as well.
I've only been to Paris once, and I've only been to New York once. So both places I must get back to. So it's been great talking to you, Talia, and good luck with the book. And let's speak again sometime in September, and we'll talk about the third daughter a bit more then.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
What a fabulous interview that was, and I think we can all benefit from working together. So let's play out with canned heat, and let's work together. You've been listening to the Arts Show podcast with Mike Madden. Come back soon for more artists, authors, musicians and anyone else connected with the arts. We're going to play out with Mike Sanchez and I Don't Stand a Chance.
Baby, you hiding something that you don't want me to know, because I'm getting a vibe from way down the side, like you're just about ready to go. Can't tell me where you stayed last night. You just can't cope with treating me right. I'm on the road to heartbreak. Now's the time to tell me so, because I'm getting a chill like I'm gonna be ill. I know you don't want me no more. I won't be satisfied with your little white lies. Girl, I've only just begun to realize I don't stand a chance. I don't stand a chance. You don't wanna know when I can't make you dance. Well, I'll say goodbye. Find yourself another guy. I wish you were mine, but I'm losing my mind. I don't stand a chance. Tell me so, because I'm getting a chill like I'm gonna be ill. I know you don't want me no more. I won't be satisfied with your little white lies. Girl, I've only just begun to realize I don't stand a chance. No, I don't stand a chance. You don't wanna know when I can't make you dance. Well, I'll say goodbye. Find yourself another guy. I wish you were mine, but I'm losing my mind. I don't stand a chance.